Millionaire woman arrived without warning. In the garden, the gardener, kneeling with his hands together, was teaching his 3 little girls with a disarming patience. She lost her breath and fell in love. What did she see in that gesture that no one else notices? Isabella Monroe's stiletto heels clicked against marble floors, each step echoing through the vast, silent foyer of her Westchester estate. 6:30 in the morning, and she was already dressed in a charcoal Armani suit, her dark hair pulled into a sleek chignon, not a strand out of place, perfect, controlled, and utterly alone. "Ms. Monroe, your car is ready," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "I'll be there in a minute," she replied, her voice clipped and efficient. Isabella paused at the sweeping staircase, glancing upward toward the wing where her daughters slept. For a fleeting moment, she considered checking on them. Clara, Luna, and Sophia, identical in appearance but wildly different in temperament, would be waking soon for their nanny to dress them for private school. The thought vanished as quickly as it had come. The last time she'd attempted a morning goodbye, Sophia had thrown a stuffed animal at her head while Luna had dissolved into tears. Only Clara, the eldest by 4 minutes, had stared at her with those unnervingly adult eyes, silently asking the question Isabella couldn't bear to answer. "When will you be a real mother to us?" Her phone buzzed. 3 new emails from the Tokyo office, a text from her CFO about quarterly projections, and a reminder about her 8 a.m. video call with investors in London. The world of Monroe Enterprises, her world, was already spinning without her. "The Milan acquisition won't close itself," she muttered, turning away from the stairs and toward the front door. A harried-looking woman in her 50s appeared from the east wing. "Ms. Monroe, before you leave." "What is it, Mrs. Winters?" Isabella didn't break stride or look up from her phone. "It's about the girls. Luna refused to eat dinner again last night, and Sophia's teacher called. She's been... Schedule an appointment with Dr. Levinson. He can adjust their therapy sessions." Isabella reached the front door. "And find a new art tutor. The current one says they're uncommunicative." "That's the 3rd this month," Mrs. Winters said carefully. "And we still need to discuss. Email me the details. I have a plane to catch." Isabella stepped outside into the crisp September morning, breathing in air scented with freshly cut grass and expensive freedom. Behind her, a house worth $17 million stood like a beautiful mausoleum, pristine, impressive, and devoid of life. Unacceptable. Richard Monroe's voice boomed through the speakerphone in Isabella's private jet. "The Henderson family has been with our bank for 3 generations. Their son's gambling problem is not our concern." Isabella stared out the window at clouds like spun sugar, wondering when her father's voice had lost the power to intimidate her. Perhaps around the time she'd doubled the company's value in 5 years, something Richard himself had failed to do in 20. "The SEC investigation would disagree," she said coolly. "We're cutting ties with the Hendersons. I've already instructed legal to begin the process. Without consulting me, I'm still chairman of the board, Isabella. And I'm CEO. Your title is ceremonial, as we both know." The silence that followed was rich with decades of unspoken tension. Richard Monroe had wanted sons. Instead, he got Isabella, who had proven more ruthless and calculating than any son might have been. He'd taught her well. Emotions were liabilities, family was business, and power was the only currency that mattered. "How are my granddaughters?" he asked, changing tactics. Isabella's grip tightened on her leather portfolio. "They're fine." "Are they? Their nanny called me yesterday. Something about Sophia destroying another painting in the gallery. That's the 4th this year. Children act out. It's normal." "It's not normal, and you know it." His voice softened. "A rare occurrence. Isabella, it's been 3 years since James left. The girls need stability." "Do not mention his name," Isabella cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "The girls have everything they need. Private school, tutors, therapists, a full staff. They need their mother." Isabella closed her eyes briefly. "I have back-to-back meetings until 7. Then I'm flying to Chicago for the Mercer presentation tomorrow. We can continue this conversation another time." She disconnected before he could respond, signaling to the flight attendant for another espresso. The caffeine would help dull the throbbing behind her eyes, a pain that appeared whenever anyone mentioned James. the girl's father, or suggested she wasn't handling motherhood correctly. 3 years. 3 years since she'd come home early from a conference to surprise him, only to find their bed empty and a note on his pillow. I can't do this anymore. The pressure, the expectations, your obsession with work. Tell the girls I'm sorry. Not sorry enough to stay. Not sorry enough to call on birthdays or Christmas. Not sorry enough to fight for custody, just gone. Vanished to some island with a yoga instructor half his age. According to the private investigator she'd hired, Isabella had frozen that day, turning all the messy feelings, betrayal, rage, heartbreak, into ice. Ice was manageable. Ice didn't break. Ice kept you standing when everything else crumbled. But ice, as it turned out, wasn't what 3 little girls needed from their only remaining parent. She's fired the new gardener, Mrs. Winters informed Richard Monroe over tea in his Manhattan penthouse. That's the 7th in 18 months. Richard sighed, looking every bit his 70 years. What was wrong with this one? According to Ms. Monroe, he planted hydrangeas that were aggressively blue instead of the pale pink she specified. Good God. Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. And the girls, Mrs. Winters set down her teacup, choosing her words carefully. They're creative in their rebellion. Last week, they orchestrated a fire drill at their school by simultaneously triggering 3 different alarms. Before that, Clara convinced the chef they all had developed sudden allergies to everything except chocolate pudding. Luna barely speaks anymore, except to her sisters in that private language they've developed. And Sophia. What about Sophia? She draws the same thing, over and over. A man with his back turned, walking away. The art therapist thinks it represents their father. Richard stared out at the Manhattan skyline, his empire of glass and steel stretching toward the clouds. My daughter is brilliant at business and a disaster at motherhood. The girls need something to change, Mrs. Winters said. Someone who can reach them, and perhaps reach Mrs. Monroe too. Richard nodded slowly. A plan forming. I may know someone. A young man who worked with troubled children in Austin. My foundation funded his program before budget cuts shut it down. He has an unusual approach, but he trailed off, contemplating. He's looking for work. And he has experience with gardening. Another gardener. Mrs. Winters looked skeptical. Not just any gardener, Richard said, picking up his phone. Someone who might just save my family before it's too late. In the Monroe mansion, while Isabella flew 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. 3 small girls huddled in a window seat overlooking the sprawling, perfectly manicured grounds, their identical faces, heart-shaped, with James's blue eyes and Isabella's dark curls, were solemn as they watched rain begin to fall. Do you think Daddy ever thinks about us? Luna whispered. Clara, always the protector, squeezed her sister's hand. It doesn't matter. We have each other. Sophia said nothing, but her small fingers traced patterns on the foggy glass. 3 stick figures holding hands, standing alone in an endless garden. Gabriel Carter arrived at the Monroe estate on a Tuesday morning in early October, his weathered pickup truck looking comically out of place next to the gleaming luxury vehicles in the staff parking area. He wore faded jeans, a simple blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, and work boots that had seen better days. At 34, his face carried the kind of lines that came from smiling in the sun rather than frowning in boardrooms. Mrs. Winters met him at the service entrance, her expression wavering between hope and skepticism. Mr. Carter, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Just Gabriel is fine, he replied, his handshake firm but gentle. His voice carried a slight Texas drawl, warm like honey over gravel. Mr. Monroe explained the situation. Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. Did he? Well, I doubt he captured the full extent of it. The gardens need significant work, but that's the least of our concerns. Gabriel nodded, his green eyes taking in the expansive grounds visible through the windows. I understand. And the little ones? The girls are, Mrs. Winters hesitated, challenging. Their mother is in Europe for the next 10 days. Perhaps that's for the best while you settle in. A hint of a smile played at the corner of Gabriel's mouth. I've worked with challenging children before. Sometimes the ones with the most thorns have the most beautiful blooms. Mrs. Winters looked at him curiously. You don't speak like most gardeners. I wasn't always a gardener. Gabriel picked up his duffel bag. I was a teacher for 8 years, 3rd grade. What happened? A shadow crossed his face. Brief but unmistakable. Budget cuts, politics, life. He shrugged, the gesture dismissing further questions. Where can I put my things? By mid-afternoon, Gabriel had surveyed the grounds, met with the groundskeeping staff, who regarded the new hire with thinly veiled resentment, and familiarized himself with the extensive landscaping plans Isabella had meticulously dictated. Everything was designed within an inch of its life. Geometric hedges, color-coordinated flower beds, and not a leaf out of place. It's like a cemetery for plants, Gabriel muttered, crouching to touch the soil beneath an unnaturally perfect row of tulips, all dressed up with nowhere to grow. A giggle, small and quickly stifled, caught his attention. Gabriel glanced up to see a flash of movement behind a nearby hedge. He smiled but pretended not to notice, continuing to inspect the flower bed. You know, he said conversationally to the tulips, plants are a lot like people. They don't do well when they're forced to be something they're not. More movement. 3 identical faces peeked out from different points around the hedge, then quickly disappeared when he looked up. Gabriel pulled a small packet from his pocket and began to sprinkle seeds into his palm. Take sunflowers, for instance. You can tell them to stay small and proper, but it's in their nature to reach for the sky. Try to make them behave, and they'll either die or find a way to grow wild anyway. One of the girls, he couldn't tell which, stepped partially into view. The garden isn't allowed to be wild, she said matter-of-factly. Mother says everything must be precisely maintained. Is that right? Gabriel looked directly at her, his expression open and curious rather than condescending. And what do you think gardens should be like? The girl blinked, clearly unused to adults asking for her opinion. Before she could answer, another identical child appeared beside her. Gardens should have hiding places, this one said, her voice slightly softer. And climbing trees, added the third, emerging from behind a stone fountain. Gabriel nodded seriously. Valid points. Gardens need structure, but also secrets, room to explore. He stood, dusting soil from his knees. I'm Gabriel. You must be the Monroe sisters. I'm Clara, said the first girl, her chin tilted with a confidence beyond her years. Luna, the quiet one offered. Sophia, said the third, eyeing the seed packet in his hand. What are those? Wildflower seeds. Gabriel held out his palm to show them. Not part of the official garden plan, but sometimes the best things grow where they're not supposed to. The girls exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Clara, clearly the spokesperson, stepped forward. We got the last gardener fired, she informed him, watching for his reaction. We put worms in his lunchbox. Gabriel's lips twitched. Seems like he got off easy. My 3rd graders once filled my desk drawer with pudding. This unexpected response earned him 3 identical looks of surprise, followed by the ghost of smiles. We have to go now, Clara announced. We have French lessons at 4. Nice meeting you, ladies, Gabriel called as they scampered away, their matching sundresses fluttering behind them. Once they were gone, he turned his attention to the far corner of the property, where a structure stood nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. Curious, he made his way toward it. The greenhouse was a Victorian masterpiece of iron and glass, clearly once the crown jewel of the estate, but now abandoned to time and neglect. Vines crawled up its skeletal frame, and most of the glass panes were either missing or cracked. Inside, broken pottery and the withered remains of long-dead plants littered the stone floor. But to Gabriel, it was perfect. He walked the perimeter, mentally calculating what it would take to restore the structure. Beneath the grime and decay, he could see the bones of something magnificent, something with history and heart, unlike the sterile showcase that was the main garden. This could be something special, he murmured, running his hand along a rusted workbench. His fingers came away coated in decades of dust, but beneath it, the wood was solid oak. A small plaque, nearly obscured by climbing ivy, caught his eye. He gently brushed aside the leaves to read the faded inscription. Elizabeth's Sanctuary, 1982. Elizabeth, Gabriel repeated softly. He recalled Mr. Monroe mentioning Isabella's mother, a gentle woman who had died when Isabella was just 12. This must have been her special place. Gabriel stood in the center of the ruined greenhouse. Turning slowly to take it all in, the afternoon sunlight streamed through broken panes, casting dappled shadows across the floor. Despite its state of disrepair, there was a piece here that was absent from the rest of the meticulously maintained estate. "This is where we'll start," he decided. That evening, after the regular groundskeeping staff had left for the day, Gabriel returned to the greenhouse with basic tools and a lantern. He began clearing away debris, working well into the night. His hands, already calloused from years of labor, grew dirty and scratched. But he didn't mind. There was something meditative about the work, stripping away years of neglect to reveal the beauty underneath. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice the 3 small figures watching him from a distance, their identical faces illuminated by the glow of his lantern. "What's he doing?" Luna whispered. "Working on the old greenhouse," Clara answered. "No one's been in there since before we were born. Mrs. Winters says it was grandmother's special place," Sophia added. Before she got sick, the girls watched in silence as Gabriel carefully removed a cracked pane of glass, setting it aside to be replaced. "He's different from the others," Luna observed. Clara narrowed her eyes, not yet ready to pass judgment. "We'll see. They all leave eventually." But as they tiptoed back to the main house, even Clara couldn't help glancing back at the solitary figure working by lantern light, his shadow cast large against the glass walls of the forgotten sanctuary in their shared bedroom. Nestled in their separate beds, the triplets fell asleep to the distant sound of gentle work, a rhythmic tapping that somehow felt more like a lullaby than an intrusion, and for the first time in months, none of them had nightmares about being left behind. The Milan acquisition had fallen through. After 62 hours of negotiations, 17 cups of espresso, and 1 migraine that had taken up residence behind Isabella's right eye, the Italian conglomerate had pulled out at the last minute. She had spent 4 months pursuing this deal, and now she would return to New York empty-handed. "The board won't be pleased," her assistant said gently, offering a bottle of water as they sat in the private lounge at Milan Malpensa Airport. Isabella took the water without looking up from her laptop. "The board doesn't run Monroe Enterprises, I do." But beneath her icy composure, doubt flickered. This was the second major deal to collapse this year. Her father would inevitably see it as proof that she was distracted, unfocused. The truth, that these failures bothered her less than they once would have, disturbed her even more. "Change of plans," Isabella announced, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. "Book me on the next flight to New York. But the investor meetings in London, reschedule them, virtual conference if necessary." Isabella stood, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. "I'm going home." Her assistant's surprise was evident. In 3 years, Isabella had never voluntarily returned early from a business trip. "Is everything all right, Miss Monroe?" "Everything's fine," Isabella replied automatically. But as she gathered her belongings, a strange restlessness stirred within her, something between anxiety and anticipation that she couldn't quite name. The Monroe estate was quiet when Isabella's town car pulled through the gates at 5:45 a.m., 2 days earlier than expected. Dawn painted the sky in watercolors of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. She had left Milan in such a hurry that she hadn't notified the staff of her early return. Isabella entered through the front door, expecting the usual tomb-like silence. Instead, she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. The soft murmur of voices coming from the direction of the sunroom. Curious, she set down her briefcase and followed the sound, her heels clicking against marble floors. As she approached the sunroom, the voices became clearer. High, childish tones, punctuated by a deeper, unfamiliar male voice. Isabella paused at the threshold, frozen by the scene before her. Her 3 daughters knelt in a semicircle on the floor, their hands joined together. Kneeling with them was a man she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple work clothes, his head slightly bowed. Morning light streamed through the windows, catching in the girls' dark curls and casting a golden halo around the group. "And thank you for this new day," the man was saying, his voice gentle but clear. "For the chance to grow and learn and be kind to one another. For Mama to come home soon," Luna added softly. "For the secret garden," Sophia whispered. "And for sending us Gabriel," Clara finished, squeezing the hands of her sisters. The man, Gabriel, smiled. Amen. Amen. The girls echoed in unison, their faces serene in a way Isabella had never seen before. The tableau was so unexpected, so intimate, that Isabella felt like an intruder in her own home. Something tightened in her chest, an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. What is going on here? Her voice cut through the peaceful moment like a shard of glass. 4 heads snapped up in unison. The girls' expressions morphed instantly from tranquility to alarm. The man, Gabriel, rose to his feet in one fluid motion, his face showing surprise but not guilt. "Mama!" Luna gasped, her eyes wide. "You're home early," Clara stated, her posture stiffening. Sophia said nothing, but sidled closer to Gabriel, half hiding behind his leg. "Mrs. Winters didn't mention you were expected back today, Mrs. Monroe," Gabriel said, his voice calm despite the tension crackling in the air. He extended his hand. "I'm Gabriel Carter, the new—" "I know who you are," Isabella cut him off, ignoring his outstretched hand. "You're the gardener my father hired. What I don't know is why you're inside my house." "Conducting some sort of prayer circle with my children." The girls exchanged nervous glances. Gabriel lowered his hand, but held Isabella's gaze. "The girls were helping me with the morning watering," he explained. "It started raining, so we came inside. We were just sharing what we're grateful for before they start their day." "Gratitude practice," Luna offered timidly. "Gabriel says it helps flowers grow stronger, and people too." Isabella looked at her middle daughter with surprise. Luna had barely spoken 3 sentences to her in the past year. "Girls, go upstairs and get ready for breakfast," Isabella instructed, her voice softer than intended. "But we already had breakfast with Gabriel," Sophia blurted, then immediately shrank back at her mother's sharp look. "Upstairs now." The girls filed past her, their matching faces solemn. Clara paused briefly beside her mother. "Please don't fire him," she whispered, just loud enough for Isabella to hear, before following her sisters. When they were gone, Isabella turned back to Gabriel, taking her first real look at the man. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the lean build of someone who worked outdoors. His face was open and unguarded, tanned from the sun, with laugh lines around green eyes that met hers without flinching. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice clipped and professional. "I appreciate your enthusiasm for your position, but there seems to be some confusion about your role here." Gabriel nodded. "I understand this must look unusual. For what it's worth, Mrs. Winters was aware we've been starting our mornings this way for the past week." "A week?" Isabella's eyebrows rose. "And what exactly have you been doing with my daughters for a week?" "Mostly gardening, sometimes talking, often listening." Gabriel's expression remained steady. "Your daughters have a lot to say, Ms. Monroe. They just need someone willing to hear it." The implication that she hadn't been that someone stung more than Isabella cared to admit. She crossed her arms, creating a barrier between them. "Mr. Carter, you were hired to maintain the grounds, not to counsel my children." Gabriel considered her words before responding. "With respect, Miss Monroe, I was hired by your father to restore more than just your garden." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "My father overstepped. Again, you're here to do a job, Mr. Carter, nothing more. The emotional well-being of my daughters is not your concern." "If you say so." Gabriel's tone was respectful, but something in his eyes, not quite defiance but a quiet certainty, told Isabella this wouldn't be the end of it. An awkward silence fell between them. Gabriel broke it first. "Would you like to see what we've been working on? The girls have been looking forward to showing you when you returned." Against her better judgment, curiosity won out. "Fine, show me." Gabriel led Isabella through the back gardens, past the pristine flower beds and immaculate hedges. Toward the far corner of the property, as they walked, Isabella observed him from behind. He moved with an easy confidence, occasionally pointing out new plantings or areas he'd restored. There was something unsettling about his comfort in a space she barely visited despite owning it. "The girls mentioned a secret garden," Isabella remarked. "I hope you haven't been encouraging them to damage the landscaping." Gabriel glanced back at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Nothing's been damaged, just reimagined." They rounded a dense cluster of rhododendrons, and Isabella stopped short. Before them stood the old Victorian greenhouse, Her mother's sanctuary, long abandoned after her death, except it wasn't abandoned anymore. The broken glass had been replaced, the ironwork scraped and repainted. Vines still climbed the structure, but now they appeared artfully arranged rather than neglected, and inside, visible through the gleaming panes, splashes of color hinted at new life. "You did this." Isabella couldn't keep the wonder from her voice. "With the girls' help?" Gabriel replied. "They've been coming out here every day after their lessons. They call it their secret garden." Isabella moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. She placed her hand on the door, hesitating. "It was my mother's," she said softly. Surprising herself with the admission, Gabriel nodded. "I know." The plaque was still there under all the ivy. Isabella pushed open the door and stepped inside. The scent hit her first. Earth and greenery and something sweet she couldn't identify. The interior had been transformed from a ruin into a magical space where plants of all varieties thrived in organized chaos. Small paths wound between raised beds. A tiny fountain burbled in one corner, and everywhere, evidence of children, painted rocks marking plant rows, small handprints in cement stepping stones, a child-sized table with 3 little chairs. "The girls did this," Isabella whispered. Overwhelmed, they helped design it, planted most of the seedlings themselves. Gabriel stood beside her, his voice gentle. "They're naturals, full of life, just waiting for the right soil to grow in." Isabella turned to face him, ready to remind him of his place. But the words died on her lips. For the first time in years, something within her shifted, like ice beginning to crack under the first warmth of spring. That evening, Isabella sat alone in her home office. Financial reports spread across her desk untouched. Her mind kept drifting back to the greenhouse, to sunlight filtering through clean glass, to the scent of soil and growing things, to 3 identical pairs of eyes looking at her with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She hadn't fired Gabriel Carter. She'd fully intended to, had even rehearsed the dismissal speech in her head as they walked back to the house. But something had stopped her. Perhaps it was the way Luna had actually spoken to her at dinner, describing how she'd planted sweet peas along the greenhouse trellis, or how Sophia hadn't thrown a single tantrum all day. Or maybe it was simply the knowledge that firing him would mean confronting her father about his interference. A conversation she wasn't prepared to have. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Heard you're back early. Dinner tomorrow. The girls can come." Isabella set the phone down without responding. Instead, she found herself opening her laptop and typing Gabriel Carter into the search bar. Within minutes, she had his history laid out before her. Gabriel Carter, 34, former 3rd grade teacher at Oakwood Elementary in Austin, Texas, winner of the state's Excellence in Education Award 3 years ago for a program he'd developed integrating gardening with emotional learning for at-risk children. The program had been cut when funding was slashed, despite impressive results. No criminal record, no spouse, no children. A photograph showed him kneeling beside a school garden, surrounded by smiling elementary students. His expression was exactly as it had been this morning. Open, warm, present. Something Isabella couldn't quite name twisted in her chest. She closed the laptop abruptly and walked to the window. From her second-floor office, she could just make out the greenhouse in the moonlight, its restored glass panels gleaming like a beacon in the darkness. The next morning, Isabella woke earlier than usual. Instead of immediately checking her emails, she found herself drawn to the girls' wing of the house. The nanny, Mrs. Roberts, was just emerging from their room. "Oh, Ms. Monroe," the woman startled. "The girls are dressed and having breakfast downstairs. Would you like me to?" "That's fine," Isabella interrupted. "I'll see them myself." Mrs. Roberts blinked in surprise, but nodded and continued down the hallway. Isabella hesitated outside the girls' door, then pushed it open. The large room they shared was divided into 3 distinct areas, each reflecting its occupant's personality. Clara's space was orderly, with books neatly arranged and a small desk covered in drawings. Luna's area featured a canopy bed surrounded by stuffed animals. Sophia's corner was the most chaotic, with art supplies scattered across every surface. Isabella moved slowly through the room, touching small pieces of her daughter's lives she rarely saw. A drawing caught her eye. 3 small figures holding hands with a taller one in what appeared to be the greenhouse. The tallest figure had green dots for hands. "They've been drawing him a lot." Isabella turned to find Mrs. Winters standing in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Gabriel," Mrs. Winters clarified. "They're quite taken with him." "So I've gathered," Isabella replied, setting down the drawing. "My father hired him without consulting me. Your father worried about the girls, as did I." Mrs. Winters had been with the family since Isabella was a child, and was one of the few people who spoke to her without deference or fear. "Gabriel has a gift with children, and with growing things. He's overstepping his role." "Perhaps," Mrs. Winters conceded, "but when was the last time you heard Luna speak in full sentences? Or saw Sophia go a whole day without a tantrum? Or watched Clara actually act like a child instead of a miniature adult?" Isabella had no answer. She moved toward the door, straightening her jacket. "I have calls this morning. I'll be in my office until noon. The girls are helping Gabriel plant sunflowers today," Mrs. Winters mentioned casually. "Just so you know." Isabella paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Is that part of the landscaping plan?" "No," Mrs. Winters smiled slightly. "But they're determined, apparently. Sunflowers are special, because they always turn their faces to find the light, even on cloudy days." Later that afternoon, Isabella found herself wandering through the back gardens, ostensibly to take a break between conference calls. She told herself she was merely inspecting the grounds, ensuring the new gardener wasn't ruining her meticulously designed landscaping. The sound of childish laughter led her toward the greenhouse. She approached quietly, stopping at a distance to observe without being seen. Gabriel and the girls were planting sunflower seeds along the greenhouse's southern exposure. Each girl had her own small watering can and packet of seeds. Gabriel knelt between them, his hands dirty as he demonstrated how to create a small well in the soil. "Not too deep," he was saying to Sophia, who was vigorously digging. "Sunflower seeds need to feel the warmth to wake up, but they also need protection." "Like us?" Luna asked. Gabriel smiled at her. "Smart observation. Yes, exactly like people. We all need both sunshine and shelter." Clara, ever practical, was carefully spacing her seeds. "Will they really grow taller than you, Gabriel?" "If we take good care of them," he promised. "By late summer, they'll be reaching for the sky, but we have to be patient. Growing takes time." "Mama doesn't like to wait for things," Sophia observed, patting soil over her seeds. "She says time is money," Gabriel chuckled. "Well, she's not wrong, but some things can't be rushed, no matter how valuable your time is. You can't hurry a sunflower or a butterfly or us," Clara finished. Gabriel's expression softened. "Especially not you three. Growing up should take exactly as long as it takes." Isabella stepped back, a strange tightness in her throat. She had always provided her daughters with everything money could buy. The best education, opportunities, privileges most children couldn't imagine. But watching them now, filthy and joyful, learning something no tutor could teach, she wondered what they had missed because of her drive to give them everything, and what she had missed as well. "You're staring at him again." Richard Monroe's voice startled Isabella from her thoughts. They were seated on the terrace for the dinner she'd finally agreed to, watching the girls play on the lawn with Gabriel, who was showing them how to make daisy chains. "I'm observing my employee," Isabella corrected, taking a sip of wine. Richard's knowing tone irritated her. "He's good with them. Better than any of those overpriced therapists you've hired. He's a gardener." "Dad, not a miracle worker." "Isn't he both?" Richard nodded toward the lawn, where Sophia was laughing as Gabriel crowned her with a circlet of daisies. "I haven't heard her laugh like that since before James left." Isabella stiffened at the mention of her ex-husband. "The girls are fine. They're resilient." "They're children, Isabella, resilient. Yes, but they still need nurturing." Richard studied his daughter's profile. "So do you. I don't need a lecture on parenting from you, of all people," Isabella snapped. Regretting the words as soon as they left her mouth, Richard didn't flinch. "Fair enough. I made plenty of mistakes with you, after your mother died." He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the greenhouse visible in the distance. "Elizabeth would have loved what he's done with her sanctuary." The mention of her mother softened Isabella's defenses slightly. "I haven't been inside it since I was 12. "I know." Richard's voice was gentle. "Maybe it's time you did more than just look through the glass." Before she could respond, the girls came bounding up the terrace steps, their dresses grass-stained and their faces flushed with excitement. "Grandpa, Mama, Gabriel's teaching us about butterflies," Luna announced breathlessly. "He says the greenhouse will attract them once the right flowers bloom," Clara added. "And we're going to tag them with tiny stickers to track them," Sophia finished. Crawling onto her grandfather's lap without hesitation, Gabriel approached more slowly, hanging back at the edge of the terrace. "Sorry about the grass stains," he said, directing his apology to Isabella. "We got a bit carried away with the nature lesson." "It's fine," Isabella replied, surprising herself. "They look happy." Something flickered in Gabriel's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or relief. He smiled, and Isabella found herself noticing the way the evening light caught in his hair, turning brown to gold at the edges. "Join us for dessert." "Gabriel," Richard offered, ignoring his daughter's sharp look. "Oh, I wouldn't want to intrude on family time," Gabriel demurred. "Please, Gabriel," Luna pleaded, and her sisters quickly joined the chorus. Isabella watched her daughter's eager faces, then glanced at Gabriel's hesitant expression. Something inside her, the ice that had protected her for 3 long years, cracked a little more. "There's plenty," she heard herself say. "You might as well stay. You need to sign these by tomorrow." Isabella's assistant placed a stack of contracts on her desk, then hesitated. "Also, Vanessa Harrington called again about the charity gala. She says you haven't RSVP'd. Isabella glanced up from her laptop. "Tell her I'll attend solo." "And the girls," Isabella paused. Normally, she would leave the triplets at home with the nanny during such events. Their presence complicated things, and managing 3 6-year-olds amid Manhattan's elite was hardly relaxing, but something made her reconsider. "They'll come too. Have Marcella prepare appropriate dresses." Her assistant looked surprised, but made a note. "One more thing. The board meeting has been moved to Friday. The quarterly reports are concerning some of the members." Of course they were. 2 failed acquisitions in 6 months, and Isabella's unusual decision to work from home 3 days a week lately had sparked whispers. She knew what they were saying. Isabella Monroe was losing her edge. The truth was more complicated. For the first time since James left, her priorities were shifting, almost without her conscious permission. "I'll be prepared," she said simply. "That's all for today." After her assistant left, Isabella found herself staring out the window toward the greenhouse, now visible from her office because she'd had the gardening staff trim back the tall hedges that had previously obscured it. She couldn't see inside from this distance, but she knew Gabriel would be there, probably with the girls helping him after their lessons. It had been 3 weeks since she'd returned early from Milan, 3 weeks of subtle but unmistakable changes. The girls were calmer, happier. They spoke more at dinner, sharing tales of seeds planted and butterflies spotted. Even their tutors had noted improvements in their focus and behavior, and Isabella herself. She was different too, though she was reluctant to examine exactly how or why. She'd started leaving her office earlier, joining the girls for their evening routine rather than working until they were asleep. Last night, she had even sat on the edge of Sophia's bed, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as she stroked her daughter's hair until the child drifted off. It felt foreign. It felt frightening. It felt like coming home. "You're holding it too tightly," Gabriel said gently, his sun-browned hand covering Isabella's as they knelt beside a raised bed in the greenhouse. Seedlings need a delicate touch. Isabella forced herself to relax her grip on the tiny plant. She was unaccustomed to feeling incompetent at anything, but gardening was proving humbling. Her corporate instincts, efficiency, control, decisive action, were liabilities here. "There," Gabriel murmured as she successfully settled the seedling into its new home. "Now you're getting it." The brush of his fingers against hers lingered a moment longer than necessary. Isabella pulled her hands away, suddenly aware of their proximity in the warm, humid air of the greenhouse. The girls were at their riding lessons, leaving her and Gabriel alone among the plants, a situation she hadn't planned but couldn't bring herself to avoid. "You've done remarkable work here," she said, rising to her feet and wiping soil on the gardening apron she wore over her casual slacks. Even dressed down, Isabella maintained an elegance that seemed at odds with the earthy surroundings. Gabriel remained kneeling, gently pressing soil around the base of the seedling. The structure was solid beneath all the neglect, Sometimes the most beautiful things just need someone to clear away what's burying them. Isabella knew he wasn't just talking about the greenhouse. Over the past weeks, his metaphors had become more transparent, his gentle challenges to her parenting more direct. What surprised her was not his boldness, but her willingness to listen. "The girls adore this place," she said, moving toward the small table where they'd left glasses of lemonade. "I've never seen them so invested in anything. Children respond to responsibility when it's paired with trust," Gabriel replied, joining her at the table. "Your daughters are extraordinary people. They just needed someone to see them as more than problems to be managed." The observation stung, but Isabella couldn't deny its truth. For too long, she had treated motherhood like another executive function, delegating the emotional labor to nannies and therapists, while she focused on providing financial security. "I didn't know how," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could censor them. "After James left, I was lost. The company made sense. The girls didn't. They needed things I didn't know how to give." Gabriel's green eyes held no judgment. "No one teaches us how to heal while raising children. You did what you could with the tools you had." "I hid behind work," Isabella corrected. "I let them suffer because I was suffering. And now?" She looked around the greenhouse, at the sunflower seedlings stretching toward light, at the handmade signs marking rows of vegetables, at the watercolor paintings of butterflies the girls had hung from twine strung across the ceiling beams. "Now I'm trying to learn new tools," she said softly. Gabriel's smile warmed something in her that had been cold for a very long time. That night, Isabella did something she'd never done before. After the girls' bath time, instead of kissing them quickly and retreating to her office, she sat on the floor of their bedroom as Gabriel led them through their evening prayers. The ritual was simple. Each child shared something they were grateful for that day, then something they hoped for tomorrow. Gabriel would add his own reflections, then close with a gentle prayer that somehow managed to be spiritual without being dogmatic. Isabella had been skeptical at first, uncomfortable with the religious overtones, but watching how the practice centered and calmed her normally chaotic daughters, she'd reluctantly approved its continuation. Tonight, she wasn't just observing. Gabriel had invited her to participate, and while part of her wanted to decline, a stronger part, the part that had been slowly awakening, pushed her to join the circle. "I'm grateful for the butterfly that visited our greenhouse today," Luna said, her soft voice confident in this familiar ritual. "The blue one with black edges. I'm grateful for the cookies Mrs. Winters made," Sophia added with a grin. "And that Mama let us have 2 instead of 1. Clara's turn came. "I'm grateful that Mama is sitting with us tonight," she said, her serious eyes finding Isabella's. "And I hope she does it again tomorrow." Isabella's throat tightened. Gabriel smiled encouragingly at her. "Your turn," he prompted gently. She took a breath. "I'm grateful for this moment, all of us together." The words felt strange in her mouth, but right in her heart. "And I hope for more moments like this." Gabriel's expression softened. "I'm grateful to witness growth, in the garden and in this family," he said. "And I hope for courage for all of us to keep growing, even when it's scary." He closed his eyes, and the girls automatically reached for each other's hands, creating a circle. After a moment's hesitation, Isabella took Luna's small hand in her right and Gabriel's warm one in her left, completing the connection. "Thank you for this day," Gabriel prayed softly, "for hands to hold and hearts that are learning to open. Watch over this family through the night, and help us remember that even in darkness, we're never alone. Amen. Amen." The girls echoed. "Amen," Isabella whispered, surprised by how right it felt. Later, after tucking the girls in herself, another new experience, awkward but deeply satisfying, Isabella found Gabriel on the terrace, looking up at the star-filled sky. "Thank you," she said simply, coming to stand beside him, "for including me tonight." "You're their mother," he replied. "You've always belonged in that circle." Isabella hugged her arms against the evening chill. "I haven't been much of a mother. You're learning," Gabriel said. "That's all any of us can do." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "You know, when plants have been kept in the dark too long, they grow pale and weak. But it's amazing how quickly they respond once you give them light. They don't forget how to grow toward it. It's built into their nature. Another gardening metaphor? Isabella asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Gabriel shrugged, his own smile appearing. Occasional hazard, but true nonetheless. They stood in companionable silence, watching the stars. When Gabriel's hand brushed against hers on the terrace railing, Isabella didn't pull away. The contact was brief, tentative, like a seedling testing new soil. But like those greenhouse plants reaching for light, something in Isabella responded instinctively, naturally, to his presence. And for the first time in years, the idea of allowing herself to feel, to be vulnerable, to need someone, didn't terrify her. It felt like possibility, like hope, like coming back to life. The Harrington Charity Gala was Manhattan's premier social event of the spring, an opportunity for New York's elite to display both their wealth and their supposed generosity. For Isabella, it had always been more business than pleasure, a necessary appearance to maintain the Monroe name among the city's power players. Tonight was different. She entered the glittering ballroom with a daughter holding each hand, Clara and Luna in matching midnight blue dresses, while Sophia walked just ahead, her dress identical but for the tiny sunflower pin Gabriel had given her that morning. "Remember what we practiced," Isabella whispered as heads turned their way. "Best behavior, just for 2 hours. Then we can go home and tell Gabriel all about it. And have ice cream," Sophia negotiated. "Ever the opportunist. If you don't spill anything on your dress," Isabella agreed, surprised by how easily she slipped into this give and take that once felt so foreign. Vanessa Harrington swooped toward them, her smile tight with surprise. Isabella and the girls, how unexpected. "They've been looking forward to it," Isabella replied smoothly, though in truth she had been the nervous one. The triplets had been delighted by the prospect of their first grown-up party. "Well, aren't they precious?" Vanessa cooed insincerely before lowering her voice. "The board members are all here. Harrison's been asking about the Q2 projections." Isabella nodded, but her usual spike of anxiety didn't materialize. 6 months ago, navigating board politics would have consumed her evening. Tonight, watching Clara politely shake hands with the mayor, while Luna and Sophia whispered secrets behind their programs. The corporate maneuvering seemed oddly distant. Isabella Monroe bringing children to the Harrington Gala. Will wonders never cease? She turned to find her father standing beside her, immaculate in his tuxedo. Despite his 70 years, Richard's expression was difficult to read, somewhere between amusement and assessment. "They deserve to see this world too," Isabella replied. "They are Monroes after all." Richard's eyes softened as he watched his granddaughter's charming and elderly socialite. "They're doing better," he observed. "So are you. Don't sound so surprised." "Not surprised. Grateful." Richard studied his daughter's face. "I haven't seen you this present in years." Isabella wanted to deflect, to maintain the careful distance she'd cultivated with her father since her mother's death, since James's betrayal. But these past weeks had been about thawing, about opening. "Things are changing," she admitted. "I'm changing. Because of Gabriel," Richard stated, not a question. Isabella felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Because of the girls. Because it was time." Richard nodded, choosing not to press. "They're flourishing, all 4 of you." Before Isabella could respond, Harrison Weber, the most vocal of her board members, approached with determined purpose. "Isabella, we need to discuss the Jenkins portfolio. Your strategy is making the investors nervous," as she excused herself to handle the business matter. Isabella caught sight of her daughters sitting together at a table, 3 dark heads bent over a shared dessert, and something twisted in her chest. An ache that was equal parts regret for the past and fierce protection of this fragile new future they were building. "I don't like him," Clara declared as the car pulled away from the gala. "Mr. Weber looks at you like you did something wrong." Isabella smiled at her perceptive daughter. "Mr. Weber is just worried about money. That's his job." "But you're the boss," Sophia pointed out. Chocolate ice cream smudged at the corner of her mouth despite Isabella's best efforts with a napkin. "Can't you tell him to stop being mean?" "It's more complicated than that, sweetie." Isabella brushed a curl from Sophia's forehead. "Sometimes even bosses have to listen to people they don't want to." "Gabriel says listening is how we learn," Luna murmured, her head drooping with sleepiness against Isabella's shoulder. a new closeness that still felt miraculous. "Gabriel says a lot of things," Isabella replied, her tone fond despite herself. The girls exchanged knowing glances, a silent communication that made Isabella wonder what else they discussed when she wasn't present. "We're going to tell Gabriel about the fancy chandelier," Clara announced, changing the subject, "and how Sophia had 3 desserts, even though you said only 1. "Tattletale," Sophia stuck out her tongue. "Girls," Isabella admonished, but laughter bubbled beneath her stern tone. Who was this woman who brought her children to galas and laughed at their antics in the backseat of town cars? Who felt more excitement about returning home to share stories with the gardener than networking with Manhattan's most influential, a woman waking up? She realized, a woman coming back to life. The house was quiet when they arrived home. The girls sleepy but insistent on finding Gabriel to report on their adventure before bed. They found him in the kitchen with Mrs. Winters, his work clothes exchanged for clean jeans and a simple button-down. Drinking tea and discussing vegetable varieties for the summer garden, the triplets swarmed him with excitement, all talking at once about chandeliers and orchestras and tiny sandwiches. Gabriel listened with complete attention, kneeling down to their level as they competed for his ear. Isabella hung back in the doorway, watching. There was something about the tableau, her daughters animated and happy, Gabriel responding with genuine interest to each breathless report, Mrs. Winters observing with quiet satisfaction that felt like a photograph she wanted to preserve forever. "All right, you 3, she finally interrupted when yawns began punctuating their stories. "Bath time and then bed. You can tell Gabriel the rest tomorrow." For once, there were no protests. The girls hugged Gabriel goodnight with an ease that still made Isabella's heart twist. They'd never shown such physical affection with any of the countless tutors, nannies, or specialists she'd hired over the years. "I'll take them up," Mrs. Winters offered, ushering the girls toward the stairs. When they were gone, a comfortable silence fell between Isabella and Gabriel. He rinsed his mug in the sink, the simple domesticity of the gesture striking in the grand kitchen. "They had a good time," Isabella said, moving further into the room. "You should have seen them. They were perfect, charming everyone, remembering all their manners." Gabriel smiled. "I'm not surprised. They're remarkable children. They wanted to make you proud," she admitted. "Me?" His eyebrows rose. "I think they wanted to make you proud, Isabella." The use of her first name, still rare, still sending an unexpected warmth through her, hung between them. Something had been shifting these past weeks, accelerating these past days. The professional distance between employer and employee had blurred into friendship, and lately, into something she wasn't quite ready to name. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility, until the sound of footsteps broke the spell. Richard entered the kitchen, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. "Gabriel," he greeted, then looked between them with shrewd eyes. "Am I interrupting?" "Not at all, sir," Gabriel replied, straightening. "I was just about to head to my quarters." "Actually," Richard said, "I'd like a word with both of you, in my study, if you don't mind." Isabella felt a flicker of unease. Her father rarely used his formal study unless the matter was serious. She and Gabriel exchanged glances before following Richard down the hallway. The study was all dark wood and leather, masculine in a way the rest of the house wasn't. Richard closed the door behind them, then moved to pour 3 fingers of whiskey into a crystal tumbler. "I had an interesting conversation tonight," he began, taking a measured sip. "With Harrison Weber," Isabella tensed. "Dad, if this is about the board—" "It's not," Richard interrupted. "Not directly anyway. Harrison mentioned that you've been distracted lately, less focused on the company, working from home more often." He turned to face them fully. "He suggested there might be inappropriate reasons for this change." The implication hung heavy in the air. Isabella's cheeks flushed with anger. "My personal life is none of Harrison Weber's concern." "I agree," Richard said mildly, "but perception matters in our world. Isabella, you know this." He shifted his gaze to Gabriel. "There's talk about the nature of your relationship with my daughter." Gabriel stood straighter, his expression dignified despite the accusation. "My relationship with Miss Monroe is entirely professional." "Sir," a lie, Isabella realized, not an action. They had never crossed physical boundaries, but in feeling, what existed between them had grown beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. Perhaps, Richard acknowledged, but appearances can be damaging on their own. He set down his glass and withdrew an envelope from his desk. Which brings me to this. He extended the envelope to Gabriel, who took it with a questioning look. "Open it," Richard instructed. Gabriel did, pulling out a check. His expression remained neutral, but Isabella caught the slight widening of his eyes. $1 million, Richard stated flatly. A generous severance package. "Dad!" Isabella gasped. "Hear me out." Richard held up a hand. "Gabriel has done wonderful work here. The girls are thriving, and for that, I'm deeply grateful. But his presence is creating complications. For the company, for this family's reputation, and for you, Isabella." Gabriel looked at the check in his hand, then back at Richard, his voice calm but firm. "With respect, Mr. Monroe, I don't want your money." Richard nodded, as if he'd expected this response. "I thought you might say that, which only reinforces my concern. A sensible man would take the opportunity. Your reluctance suggests there are emotional factors at play." Isabella felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. "This is absurd. You can't just buy people off when they become inconvenient." "Can't I?" Richard's voice sharpened. "It's how our world works, Isabella. You've done it yourself in business countless times." The comparison struck her like a physical blow. Gabriel carefully replaced the check in its envelope and set it on the desk. "I should go," he said quietly. "Gabriel," Isabella began. "It's all right." His eyes met hers, communicating something beyond the tension of the moment. "We'll talk tomorrow." After he left, Isabella rounded on her father. "How dare you? After everything he's done for the girls." "This isn't about the girls," Richard cut her off. "It's about you, Isabella. I see how you look at him. I see how he's changing you." "Is that so terrible?" she challenged, her voice breaking slightly. "That I'm finally healing, finally learning to be the mother they deserve." Richard's expression softened unexpectedly. "No, it's the miracle I've been praying for. But at what cost? Your company is beginning to suffer. The board is questioning your commitment, and a relationship with the gardener. You know what people will say." "I don't care what people say," Isabella insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. She had always cared what people thought, had built her life around appearances and expectations. Richard stepped closer, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Yes, you do. And more importantly, you should care what this would do to the girls. Think about it, Isabella. The whispers, the gossip, the inevitable comparisons to their father's betrayal. Is that what you want for them?" Isabella felt trapped, cornered by logic that struck at her deepest fears. That she would hurt her daughters again. That she would choose her own happiness over their well-being, just as she had after James left. "I need to think," she whispered, stepping away from her father's grasp. Richard nodded, sympathy in his eyes. "That's all I'm asking. Think carefully about what matters most." As Isabella left the study, the weight of impossible choices pressed down on her shoulders. In the quiet hallway, she could hear the distant sound of her daughter's laughter as Mrs. Winters read them a bedtime story. And somewhere on the grounds, Gabriel was returning to his quarters alone, carrying the knowledge that to this family, to this world, he would always be just the gardener, no matter what he had become to them. To her, Isabella didn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, watching dawn break over the grounds, her mind replaying Richard's words, Gabriel's quiet dignity, the gentle way he'd folded the check and left it behind. By morning, she had no answers, only a hollow ache beneath her ribs, and the certainty that whatever happened next would change everything. She dressed carefully in a simple blouse and slacks rather than her usual power suit, then went to wake the girls herself, another new habit that still felt foreign but necessary. They were already awake, huddled together on Clara's bed, their matching faces solemn in a way that made Isabella's heart clench. "Good morning, sweethearts," she began, forcing brightness into her tone. "Gabriel's leaving, isn't he?" Clara asked, direct as always. Isabella faltered. "What makes you say that?" "We heard Grandpa," Sophia explained, her lower lip trembling. "He was on the phone this morning." He said Gabriel would make the right decision. Luna, quiet. Luna, who had only recently found her voice again, simply stared at Isabella with wide, accusing eyes. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Nothing's been decided yet. But yes, there's a situation that might mean changes. Because Grandpa doesn't want him here, Clara stated flatly. It wasn't a question. It's more complicated than that, Isabella began. But Sophia cut her off. It's because of you and Gabriel, isn't it? Because you like him. Isabella's breath caught. Even her 6-year-olds could see what she'd been trying to deny to herself. You're too young to understand. We're not babies, Clara interrupted, her small face fierce with determination. We understand more than you think. We like Gabriel, Luna whispered, her voice trembling. He listens to us. He doesn't think we're problems. He makes the scary dreams go away. Isabella reached for her daughters, but they withdrew. 3 pairs of identical eyes watching her with a mixture of hurt and accusation that cut deeper than any business rivalry ever could. I promise I'll fix this, she said, unsure how she would keep such a promise. Like you fixed it when Daddy left, Clara challenged, her words striking with precision. Isabella recoiled as if slapped. Before she could respond, Mrs. Winters appeared at the doorway. The girls will be late for school, she said gently, reading the tension in the room. I'll help them finish getting ready. Isabella nodded, grateful for the rescue but devastated by the fracture she felt opening between herself and her daughters. A chasm she'd only recently begun to bridge. We'll talk more later, she promised, but the girls had already turned away, a united front against another adult betrayal. The greenhouse was empty when Isabella entered an hour later. The morning sun streamed through the glass, catching on water droplets and creating tiny rainbows among the plants. But the magic felt diminished without Gabriel's presence. She found him in the main gardens, kneeling beside a flower bed, systematically dividing overgrown perennials. His movements were methodical, focused, as if physical labor might provide clarity that words could not. Gabriel, she called softly. He looked up, shading his eyes against the sun. For a moment, he simply watched her approach, his expression unreadable. Then he set aside his tools and stood, brushing soil from his hands. I've been thinking about your father's offer, he said when she reached him. It wasn't my offer, Isabella replied quickly. I would never. I know. His smile was gentle, understanding. But he wasn't wrong about everything. Isabella's throat tightened. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Something in his posture, in the careful distance he maintained, told her what his decision had been before he spoke it aloud. I think it's best, Gabriel said softly. For everyone. The girls will be devastated. Isabella's voice hitched. They're already upset. They somehow knew, before I even told them anything. Gabriel nodded, unsurprised. They're intuitive. They sense more than adults give them credit for. They need you. The words I need you remained unspoken, hovering just behind her lips. What they need, Gabriel countered gently, is stability, a mother who's fully present, a family without whispers and judgment hanging over them. He gestured around at the grand estate. This is their world, Isabella, not mine. It could be, she argued, taking a step closer. My father doesn't make these decisions. I do. Gabriel's expression softened with something like tenderness, like regret. It's not just about your father. It's about what's right for the girls, for you, for your company. Since when do you care about Monroe Enterprises? Isabella's frustration sharpened her tone. Since it's part of who you are, he replied simply. I won't be the reason you lose something you've worked so hard to build. Isabella felt tears threatening, an unfamiliar sensation for a woman who prided herself on never showing weakness. So you're just going to walk away after everything that's happened here? I'm not walking away, Gabriel corrected. I'm doing what I believe is best for those 3 little girls I've come to care about, and for their mother. The tenderness in his voice nearly broke her. They stood facing each other in the garden where everything had begun to change, the spring breeze carrying the scent of new growth around them. When? She managed to ask. Today, he replied. I've already packed. I'll say goodbye to the girls after school if that's all right. Isabella wanted to argue, to forbid it, to order him to stay as his employer. But the truth that had been growing between them these past weeks made such tactics impossible. What existed between them had long since transcended professional boundaries. "Where will you go?" she asked instead, hating the smallness of her voice. "Back to Austin. I still have friends there. Maybe I can restart my teaching program." He hesitated, then added quietly, "They need to understand this isn't about abandonment. I'm not leaving because I don't care. I'm leaving because I care too much." The parallel to James was unmistakable, yet entirely different. James had fled from responsibility. From the demands of family life, Gabriel was stepping away to protect that very family, asking nothing for himself. "I won't take your father's money," he added firmly. "I wouldn't expect you to," Isabella replied, a sad smile touching her lips. "You're a better person than any of us deserve, Gabriel Carter." He shook his head. "That's not true. You're exactly the mother those girls deserve. You just needed to remember it." The distance between them, physical, social, circumstantial, had never felt so vast yet so meaningless simultaneously. Isabella took another step forward, close enough now to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the garden, for the girls, for waking me up." Gabriel's gaze held hers, and for a moment, Isabella thought he might bridge the final distance between them. But he stepped back instead, his restraint a testament to his character. "The greenhouse is thriving now," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It just needed someone to believe in it again. Like the girls, like you." The triplets' goodbye to Gabriel was devastating in its quiet intensity. No tantrums, no dramatic pleas, just 3 solemn little girls clinging to his hands as he knelt before them in the greenhouse that had become their sanctuary. "You can't forget to water the sunflowers," Sophia instructed, her voice wobbling despite her attempt at bravery. "They need lots of water to grow tall. And the butterflies will come soon," Luna added. "You have to be here to see them." Clara, always the protector, simply stared at Gabriel with dry eyes and wet lashes. "You promised you wouldn't leave," she finally said. Her accusation hanging in the warm greenhouse air, Gabriel didn't deny it or make excuses. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices," he explained gently, "even when they don't want to. But I need you 3 to know something very important." He took their small hands in his. "This isn't goodbye forever, just goodbye for now." "That's what Daddy said," Sophia whispered. Gabriel's face tightened with pain. "I'm not your daddy, but I promise I will never forget you, and I will always, always be thinking of you when I see sunflowers and butterflies." "Will you still pray for us?" Luna asked. "Every night," he promised. Isabella watched from the greenhouse doorway, her own heart breaking as Gabriel gave each girl a tight hug, whispered something in their ears that made them nod solemnly, then finally stood to leave. The triplets remained where they were, 3 small statues in the center of the secret garden, their faces so perfectly mirroring Isabella's own inner devastation that she could barely breathe. "Take care of them," Gabriel said quietly as he passed her. "And yourself," she nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. He hesitated, then reached out to brush his fingers lightly against hers, their first and final touch. Then he was gone, walking up the path toward the main house where a taxi waited to take him away. Isabella turned back to her daughters, who had not moved, their eyes fixed on the space Gabriel had occupied. "Girls," she began, but no other words came. Clara looked up, her small face set with determination far beyond her years. "We need to pray," she announced. "That's what Gabriel would tell us to do when we're sad." Isabella swallowed hard. "All right," she agreed, moving to kneel beside them on the stone floor. "Show me how." The 4 Monroe women formed a circle, hands joined, heads bowed, in the greenhouse filled with growing things, surrounded by evidence of care and patience. Isabella closed her eyes and listened as her daughters taught her how to pray for a broken heart. The sunflowers bloomed in Gabriel's absence. They stretched toward the sky, just as he had promised, their golden faces tracking the sun across summer days that seemed emptier without him. Isabella maintained their evening ritual with the girls, the gratitude circle, the prayers, though it felt hollow sometimes, an echo of what had been. July faded into August. The greenhouse flourished under the girls' determined care. but the rest of the estate felt subdued. Isabella threw herself back into work, spending long hours at the office, yet found herself distracted by thoughts of green eyes and gentle hands. The triplets grew quieter, more withdrawn, despite her efforts to fill the void Gabriel had left. "They'll adjust," Richard assured her over dinner one evening. "Children are resilient." Isabella set down her fork, studying her father's confident expression. "Are they? Or do they just learn to hide their wounds?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Isabella, I hid mine," she continued. "After Mom died, after James left, I built walls and called it strength." She gestured toward the window, where the triplets could be seen in the distance, 3 small figures in the greenhouse. "I don't want that for them." "What do you want?" Richard asked. Something like genuine curiosity in his voice. Isabella considered the question seriously. For so long, her wants had been simple: success, control, respect. Now, they were messier, more complicated. "I want them to be whole," she finally said. "Not broken and patched together like I was. Like I am. And Gabriel." Richard's tone was careful, neutral. Isabella met her father's gaze directly. "I want him too." The admission hung between them, simple and devastating in its honesty. Richard studied his daughter's face, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman she had become rather than the child he had shaped. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "Harrison has been gathering support for his restructuring proposal." "I know. You could lose the CEO position if you don't fight back." Isabella nodded, surprised by her own calm. 6 months ago, the threat would have consumed her, driven her to work through the night preparing counterattacks. Now, she found herself calculating different costs, different values. "Some things matter more," she said simply. The package arrived the next morning as Isabella prepared for the board meeting. No return address, just a small box postmarked from Austin, Texas. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay 3 identical bracelets made of braided leather with small silver sunflower charms. A note in familiar handwriting read, "For my brave sunshine girls. Wear these and remember, always turn your face toward the light." A smaller envelope contained a pressed butterfly wing, blue with black edges, and a single line. "Luna spotted this one first. Tell her it found its way to Texas." Nothing for Isabella. No message. No acknowledgement of what had grown between them during those transformative weeks. Just these small treasures for her daughters. Proof that he had kept his promise to remember them. The girls clutched their bracelets like lifelines when she presented them that evening. Luna cradled the butterfly wing as if it were made of gold. For the first time since Gabriel's departure, their faces lit with something like joy. "He didn't forget us," Sophia whispered, her small fingers tracing the sunflower charm. "He promised he wouldn't," Clara reminded her. But relief colored her voice too. Isabella watched her daughter's reactions, feeling something crystallize within her, a decision that had been forming since Gabriel walked away, hardening like amber around the truth she could no longer deny. "Would you like to visit him?" she heard herself ask. 3 identical faces turned to her in perfect synchronicity, hope blooming across their features. "In Texas," Luna breathed. "In Texas," Isabella confirmed. "We could go. All of us, if that's what you want." "When?" Clara demanded, practical even in excitement. "Tomorrow," Isabella replied, the plan forming as she spoke it. "We'll leave first thing in the morning." "This is insanity," Richard protested, when Isabella called to inform him of their impromptu trip. "The board meeting." "I've sent my proxy vote to Marcus," she interrupted. "He'll represent my interests." "Your interests, Isabella. You could lose everything you've built. Or I could gain something that matters more," she countered. "Dad, I need to do this. The girls need it. Maybe you do too." "Me?" Richard sounded genuinely startled. "What do I have to do with this foolishness?" Isabella took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You're coming with us." "Absolutely not. You owe it to them," she insisted. "You're the one who brought Gabriel into our lives and then forced him out. You need to see this through." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Isabella wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, Richard sighed deeply. "You're as stubborn as your mother." It was the closest thing to a capitulation she could expect. Austin, Texas in August was an assault of heat and color, so different from the manicured restraint of Westchester that it felt like another planet. The Monroe family private jet landed at noon, the sun high and merciless in a cloudless sky. "It's so hot," Sophia complained as they descended the stairs to the tarmac. "And bright," Luna added, squinting behind her sunglasses. Richard, immaculate despite the journey in his light summer suit, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "This is madness, Isabella. We don't even know where he lives." "Yes, we do." Isabella adjusted her own sunglasses, grateful for their shield. "I had my assistant track down his address through the employee records." "And what exactly is your plan?" Richard asked as they settled into the waiting SUV. "Show up on his doorstep and declare your undying love." Isabella shot her father a warning look, mindful of the triplets listening intently from the back seat. "I don't have a plan," she admitted. "I just know we need to be here." The drive took them from the gleaming airport through increasingly modest neighborhoods until they reached a small area that seemed caught between gentrification and tradition. Craftsman bungalows with colorful doors sat alongside newly renovated homes with modern lines. Trees provided blessed shade along streets named after Texas heroes. "This is it," the driver announced, pulling up before a small blue house with a wide front porch and a yard exploding with wildflowers and vegetables. Gabriel's home. Isabella's heart contracted painfully. "Wait here," she instructed her father and the girls, needing a moment alone to gather her courage. The front path was lined with sunflowers, smaller than those at the estate, but no less vibrant. Wine chimes tinkled gently from the porch ceiling. Isabella climbed the steps slowly, each footfall bringing her closer to a confrontation she had rehearsed 100 times in her mind during the flight. But when she reached the door and raised her hand to knock, her carefully prepared speech evaporated. What right did she have to disrupt the life he'd rebuilt without them? What could she possibly offer that would outweigh the complications her presence would bring? Before she could retreat, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Isabella." She turned to find Gabriel standing at the bottom of the porch steps, grocery bags in his arms, his expression a mixture of shock and something she couldn't quite name. He looked different here, more relaxed in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, his skin darker from the Texas sun, his hair slightly longer, but his eyes were the same, green and clear and honest. "What are you doing here?" he asked, setting down the bags. Before she could answer, the SUV doors flew open and 3 small bodies hurtled across the yard, a blur of matching sundresses and dark curls. "Gabriel," they cried in unison, flinging themselves at him with such force that he staggered back, dropping to one knee to receive their enthusiastic embraces. "My goodness," he laughed, his voice thick with emotion as small arms encircled his neck. "Look at you 3. You've grown a foot since I saw you last." "We got your bracelets," Sophia announced, proudly displaying her wrist. "And the butterfly," Luna added. "We came to see where it flew." "We missed you," Clara stated simply, her arms still locked around his neck. Gabriel looked up over their heads to Isabella, questions in his eyes. "How?" "We needed to see you," Isabella said softly, descending the steps to stand before him. "All of us." She gestured toward the SUV, where Richard was emerging with reluctant dignity, his expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. Gabriel rose slowly to his feet, the girls still clinging to him like barnacles to a ship. His gaze traveled from Isabella to Richard and back again, confusion evident. "I don't understand," he admitted. Isabella took a deep breath, keenly aware that this moment, this conversation, would determine the course of all their lives. But before she could speak, Richard stepped forward. "Gabriel," he acknowledged with a stiff nod. "I believe I owe you an apology." Gabriel's eyebrows rose in surprise. The triplets quieted, sensing the importance of the moment. Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I was wrong to interfere, wrong to try to buy you off." His gaze shifted to Isabella, then to his granddaughters. "I thought I was protecting my family. I see now I was only protecting my own outdated ideas about what that family should look like." Gabriel's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained in his posture. "That's why you came?" he asked, "to apologize." "No," Isabella said, finding her voice at last. "We came because without you we're incomplete. Because 3 little girls have been praying every night for you to come back. She stepped closer, her heart thundering. Because I've been praying too, Gabriel. And I never prayed before you showed me how. Something in his eyes changed then. A flicker of hope quickly guarded. Isabella, he began, his voice gentle but cautious. Your world is in New York. The company, the girls' school, everything you've built. A world can be rebuilt, she interrupted. A life can change direction. You taught me that. Gabriel looked down at the 3 hopeful faces still watching him with absolute trust. Then back at Isabella, conflict evident in his expression. It's not that simple. Actually, Richard interjected unexpectedly. It can be. He addressed Gabriel directly. Businessman to businessman. Monroe Enterprises has been considering expanding our charitable foundation's focus on educational initiatives for underprivileged youth. We'd need someone to head that division. Someone with teaching experience and a proven track record of innovative approaches. Gabriel blinked, clearly caught off guard. Mr. Monroe. Richard, the older man corrected. And before you object on principle, this isn't charity. It's a recognition of your qualifications. The position would be based here in Austin with occasional travel to New York. Isabella stared at her father in astonishment. This wasn't part of any plan they had discussed. He caught her gaze and gave a small shrug, as if to say, I can adapt too. You know. Gabriel shook his head slightly, processing. And the girls, their lives in New York. Children are adaptable, Isabella said, echoing words she'd heard so often, especially when they're surrounded by love. She took another step toward him, close enough now to see the flecks of gold in his eyes, to feel the familiar pull between them. That distance and time had failed to diminish. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now, she continued softly. We came because we needed to see you, to tell you in person that you changed us. All of us. Her voice dropped lower, and to ask if you could find room in your garden for 4 more flowers. Gabriel's expression opened then, hope and caution mingling in equal measure. But before he could respond, Luna tugged insistently at his hand. Gabriel, she asked in her soft, serious voice, can we pray about it? That's what you taught us to do when we don't know what to do. A smile bloomed across his face, the first real smile since their arrival. And Isabella knew, watching it spread, that regardless of what happened next, they had been right to come. Right to follow the pull of their hearts across state lines and social boundaries to this sun-drenched yard filled with flowers that always turned their faces toward the light. Yes, Luna, Gabriel agreed, kneeling once more to their level. That's exactly what we should do. The small church on Magnolia Street had stood for over a century, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical. Its white clapboard exterior gleamed in the Texas sunshine, while inside, cool shadows and worn wooden pews offered sanctuary from the August heat. Gabriel had brought them here after their impromptu prayer circle in his front yard, a neutral ground to continue their conversation away from curious neighbors' eyes. The triplets explored the sanctuary with quiet reverence while the adults sat in the back row, the silence between them heavy with unspoken possibilities. This is where you come to pray, Isabella asked, running her hand over the smooth, polished wood of the pew. Gabriel nodded. Most Sundays and sometimes on weekday mornings before work. He smiled faintly. It's where I was when you found me in Austin. I come here to think, to find clarity. And did you? Find clarity, I mean. Isabella's voice was soft, uncertain, not the kind I expected. His gaze drifted to the girls, who had discovered a children's corner with picture books, and were sitting cross-legged on a colorful rug. I thought distance would make things simpler. Instead, it just made everything hurt more, Isabella finished for him. Their eyes met, acknowledgement passing between them of the pain they'd both carried these past months. Richard, seated a discreet distance away, pretended to be absorbed in a hymnal, though Isabella knew he was listening to every word. I missed them, Gabriel admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Every day. Just them, Isabella asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider. Gabriel's eyes, when they met hers, held no pretense. No, not just them. The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Isabella's chest, but uncertainty lingered. Gabriel, I need you to understand something. If there's a future for us, it won't be easy. The board is already challenging my leadership. The society pages would have a field day. The girls would face questions. Whispers. I know. Gabriel's expression was serious. That's why I left. Those concerns haven't changed. But I have, Isabella insisted. I don't care about the board or the gossip columns or what anyone thinks anymore. I've spent my entire life trying to meet everyone's expectations. My father's, the company's, society's. The only expectations that matter now are my daughter's and my own. And what do you expect? Gabriel asked, his voice low. To be happy, she answered simply. To be whole. And I don't think that can happen without you in our lives. Gabriel's hands, resting on the pew between them, tightened slightly. Isabella, I need to be sure this isn't just gratitude or confusion. What I feel for you, for all of you, is too important to risk on impulse. This isn't impulse, she countered. It's the most clear-headed decision I've ever made. From the front of the church, Luna called out, Gabriel, come see what we found. He rose, giving Isabella a look that said their conversation wasn't finished, and made his way to the children's corner. Isabella watched as he knelt beside the girls, examining whatever treasure they'd discovered with genuine interest. He loves them, Richard observed quietly, abandoning the pretense of ignoring their conversation. Yes, there was no denying the obvious bond. And you? Isabella turned to her father, surprised by the directness of his question. Yes, she admitted. I love him too. Richard sighed deeply, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. Your mother would approve. You know, she always said I was too concerned with appearances, too rigid in my expectations. A sad smile touched his lips. She would have liked him. Isabella blinked back unexpected tears. I think so too. For what it's worth, Richard continued. I meant what I said about the position at the foundation. It's yours to offer him if you want. No strings, no expectations. Just an option. Before Isabella could respond, the girls came racing down the aisle toward them, excitement evident on their identical faces. Mama, Grandpa, Sophia exclaimed. Gabriel's going to show us his school garden. Can we go, please? Isabella looked to Gabriel, who had followed at a more sedate pace. School garden. I've been volunteering at the elementary school where I used to teach, he explained. They let me restart the garden program, though it's not as extensive as before. Gabriel's teaching kids about butterflies and plants and feelings. Clara informed them with the gravity of someone sharing state secrets. Feelings. Richard raised an eyebrow. Gabriel's cheeks colored slightly. Emotional literacy through gardening. It's the program I developed before the funding cuts. The idea is that caring for living things helps children develop empathy and emotional awareness. Isabella felt a surge of pride, seeing him in his element. I'd love to see it, she said, and meant it. The school garden was a modest plot behind an equally modest elementary school in one of Austin's working-class neighborhoods. Nothing like the grand greenhouse and manicured grounds of the Monroe estate, but vibrant with life and clearly tended with care. The students did most of the planting, Gabriel explained, as he led them through rows of vegetables and flowers. We're growing food for the school cafeteria and the local food bank. The triplets raced ahead, exclaiming over familiar plants and discovering new ones. Richard, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit, nevertheless bent to examine a tomato plant with genuine interest. You've created something wonderful here, Isabella said quietly, walking beside Gabriel. It's small, but meaningful. His voice held quiet pride. These kids don't have much, but they can come here and grow something beautiful with their own hands. It changes how they see themselves, how they interact with others. Like it changed my daughters, Isabella observed. Gabriel nodded. Children in gardens aren't so different. They both need patience, attention, and room to grow in their own way. They paused at the edge of a butterfly garden where dozens of colorful insects fluttered among purple coneflowers and milkweed. The sight brought Isabella back to their greenhouse, to the watercolor butterflies the girls had painted and hung from the rafters. I could help you expand this, she said suddenly. Not just here, but in schools throughout Texas, throughout the country. Even, Gabriel looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? The Monroe Foundation has the resources to implement your program on a national scale, Isabella explained. the vision forming as she spoke. Schools in underserved communities, urban areas without green spaces. We could create gardens like this everywhere. Isabella, Gabriel's voice held a note of caution. That's a wonderful idea, but you're worried I'm trying to buy your affection? She finished for him. I'm not. This program has value regardless of us. It deserves to reach more children. Gabriel studied her face, searching for hidden motives and finding none. Slowly he nodded. It would change lives, he acknowledged. Yes, it would. Isabella took a deep breath. But that's a conversation for another day. First, we need to decide about us, about our future. Our future, Gabriel repeated, the words clearly significant to him. Isabella, are you sure this is what you want? Your life in New York is just a place, she interrupted. A very expensive, very stressful place where I've been successful but not happy. Not until you showed us how to grow something beyond money and power. Gabriel's expression softened. And the girls, their school, their friends. They never had friends, Isabella admitted with painful honesty. They had playdates arranged by assistants with children from appropriate families. What they found with you, connection, belonging, that's what matters. Before Gabriel could respond, Richard approached with the triplets in tow, all three girls clutching small bouquets of wildflowers they'd gathered from the garden's edge. I believe we should continue this discussion over dinner, Richard announced. Perhaps somewhere with air conditioning and cold drinks. Texas in August is not for the faint of heart. Gabriel looked uncertain. I don't want to impose... Nonsense. Richard cut him off. We've flown across the country to see you. The least you can do is join us for a meal. Isabella recognized her father's tactics. The businessman creating neutral ground for negotiations. But she also saw something new in his manner. A genuine effort to bridge the divide he had helped create. Dinner was at a local restaurant Gabriel recommended. Casual enough that they wouldn't feel out of place in their travel clothes. Nice enough that Richard wouldn't balk at the setting. The triplets were uncommonly well behaved, perhaps sensing the importance of the evening, though their excitement at being with Gabriel again occasionally bubbled over in bursts of laughter and whispered conversations. As dessert arrived, homemade peach cobbler that even Richard admitted was exceptional. Isabella felt a strange sense of rightness settle over her. Here they were, her fragmented family, temporarily whole again in this unlikely place, surrounded by people who had no idea who they were or what was at stake in their quiet conversation. I've been thinking, Gabriel said, as the girls focused on demolishing their shared dessert, about what happens next. Isabella's heart quickened. And I think, he continued carefully, that rushing into decisions wouldn't be fair to anyone, especially not to Clara, Luna, and Sophia. Isabella felt a flicker of disappointment, but nodded. You're right, of course. That said, Gabriel continued, his eyes holding hers, I also think that what's grown between us, all of us, is too important to ignore. What are you suggesting? Richard asked, his tone businesslike but not unkind. Gabriel took a breath, gathering his thoughts. A middle path. I'll come back to New York, not as your gardener, he added quickly to Isabella, but to help establish the educational program through the foundation. We'll take time to let the girls adjust. His eyes met Isabella's again, to let everything unfold naturally. No pressure, no expectations. A trial period, Richard summarized, always quick to translate emotions into practical terms. A beginning, Gabriel corrected gently. The right kind of beginning, with clear boundaries and honest intentions. Isabella considered his proposal. It was sensible, thoughtful, prioritizing the children's well-being while acknowledging the connection between the adults. Exactly the kind of measured approach she would expect from Gabriel. But a small, rebellious part of her, the part that had flown across the country on an impulse, wanted more, wanted certainty, wanted to sweep away all the careful boundaries and reasonable considerations, and simply claim this man who had changed their lives. Before she could respond, Luna looked up from her dessert, her quiet voice unexpectedly clear. Are you coming home with us, Gabriel? All adult conversation ceased. 3 identical pairs of hopeful eyes fixed on Gabriel's face, waiting for his answer with the directness only children can manage. Gabriel looked to Isabella, a question in his eyes. Well, she prompted, a smile tugging at her lips. "Are you?" In that moment, surrounded by the family they might become, Gabriel's expression softened into certainty. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm coming home." 1 year later, the greenhouse bloomed with more than plants. Laughter echoed among the glass panes, mingling with the sound of children's voices, and the soft background melody of wind chimes hung from the rafters. The once abandoned sanctuary had been expanded, its Victorian bones preserved, but enhanced with modern touches. Additional glass wings that embraced more growing space, a small pond with water lilies and comfortable seating areas scattered throughout. Isabella stood at the entrance, one hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her abdomen. Watching the scene before her, Gabriel sat cross-legged on a patch of grass, surrounded by the triplets and a group of children from the Monroe Foundation's first New York garden program. He was demonstrating how to create seed bombs, little clay balls packed with wildflower seeds that could transform vacant urban lots into meadows of color. "The secret," he was explaining, his voice carrying that gentle authority that had first captivated her daughters, "is believing in what you can't see yet. These seeds look dry and dead, but inside each one is a complete blueprint for something beautiful." The children leaned forward, entranced by the simple magic of possibility cupped in their palms. Among them, Clara, Luna, and Sophia, no longer the withdrawn, troubled girls of a year ago, helped the younger children, showing the same patience Gabriel had shown them. 7-year-old Clara caught her mother's eye and smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that still felt like a miracle every time Isabella witnessed it. So much had changed in a year. So much healing had taken place, not just for the girls, but for all of them. The merger with Richards Consolidated had gone through 6 months ago, removing the threat to Isabella's leadership while expanding Monroe Enterprises' reach. Harrison Weber had resigned from the board, unable to accept the company's new direction, which included a significant expansion of their charitable foundation under Gabriel's guidance. The society pages had indeed had a field day when Isabella Monroe, ice queen of Manhattan's business elite, had not only brought her gardener back from Texas, but eventually, after a sensible period of professional collaboration, married him in a small ceremony in the greenhouse. The gossip had burned hot and fast, then extinguished itself in the face of more interesting scandals. What remained was a strange new respect for a woman who had finally chosen authentic happiness over appearances. "Penny, for your thoughts." Richard's voice broke into her reverie as he joined her at the greenhouse entrance. At 71, he looked somehow younger than he had a year ago, more relaxed in casual slacks and a light sweater, his once rigid posture softened by regular sessions in the garden with his granddaughters. "Just counting blessings," Isabella replied with a smile. Richard nodded, his gaze following hers to the happy gathering. "He's extraordinary with them. All of them." "Yes, he is." No need to specify who he was. Gabriel had become the center of their family universe, the steady, nurturing presence that balanced Isabella's more driven nature. "Your mother would be proud," Richard said unexpectedly, "of the greenhouse, of you, of all of this." Isabella slipped her arm through her father's, a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable in the frost of their previous relationship. "I think she would be proud of you too, Dad. You've changed as much as any of us," Richard harumphed, but didn't deny it. His transformation from ruthless patriarch to doting grandfather and mentor had been gradual, but profound. He still maintained offices at Monroe Enterprises, but his focus had shifted to the foundation, where his business acumen complemented Gabriel's vision for educational outreach. "Mrs. Winters says lunch is ready whenever everyone's finished playing in the dirt," he reported with mock seriousness. Isabella laughed. "I'll round them up." As she moved through the greenhouse toward Gabriel and the children, Isabella marveled at how different her life was from the carefully controlled existence she had once maintained. The Monroe estate remained their home, but it had been transformed, more open, more alive. Guest rooms once reserved for visiting dignitaries now housed teachers and administrators from the garden program during training sessions. The formal dining room where Isabella had endured countless silent meals as a child now regularly echoed with the chaos of family dinners and planning meetings. And Isabella herself had changed most of all. The woman who once measured success in acquisitions and profit margins now found her greatest satisfaction in the growth she could see around her, in her daughters, in the children touched by the foundation's work, in her relationship with Gabriel, and in the new life growing beneath her heart. "Lunchtime, explorers," she announced, reaching the circle of children. Gabriel looked up, his smile warming as it always did when he saw her after a year together. That smile still had the power to quicken her pulse. He rose to his feet, brushing soil from his hands. "Perfect timing. We just finished our seed bombs." The children scattered to wash up, the triplets leading the way with the easy confidence of those who knew themselves at home. Gabriel stepped close to Isabella, one hand coming to rest gently on her abdomen. "How are my girls doing?" he asked softly. "Restless today," Isabella replied, covering his hand with her own. "She's going to be a gymnast, I think. Or a gardener," Gabriel suggested with a grin. "Always digging around." The ultrasound had confirmed what Gabriel had somehow known from the moment Isabella shared the news of her pregnancy. They were having another girl, a sister for the triplets, a daughter who would know from her first breath what it meant to be part of a family bound by love rather than obligation. "The doctor says everything looks perfect," Isabella assured him, seeing the flicker of concern that always underlay his joy about the pregnancy. At 36, she was considered high risk, a fact that occasionally kept Gabriel awake at night despite all reassurances. "Good," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You'll tell me if you need to rest." Isabella nodded, though they both knew she would push herself too hard if left unchecked. Some habits were harder to break than others. Fortunately, she had Gabriel to remind her that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and asking for help wasn't failure. Lessons that had transformed her as both a woman and a mother. After lunch, while the visiting children participated in art activities supervised by Mrs. Winters and Richard, the Monroe Carter family retreated to their favorite spot, the central garden of the greenhouse, where the first sunflowers Gabriel had planted with the triplets still returned each year, their descendants growing taller and stronger with each generation. Gabriel sat on a bench with Isabella beside him, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. The triplets sprawled on a colorful blanket nearby, making daisy chains and sharing secrets in the private language they still sometimes used among themselves. "I can't believe it's been a year," Isabella murmured, watching her daughters with quiet wonder. "The best year of my life," Gabriel replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Isabella smiled, thinking of all they had navigated together, the challenges of blending their very different worlds, the skepticism of her corporate colleagues, the adjustments of creating a family from broken pieces. It hadn't been easy, but it had been right, in a bone-deep way that all her previous correct decisions had never approached. "Mine too," she agreed, "though I think next year might be even better." Her hand drifted to her abdomen, where their daughter kicked as if in agreement. Gabriel followed her gaze, his expression softening with tenderness. "Have you decided on a name?" he asked. They had been discussing possibilities for weeks, but Isabella had been characteristically indecisive, wanting the perfect name for this child who represented so much to all of them. "I have," she said, surprising him. "If you agree, tell me." Isabella took a deep breath, suddenly shy. "Faith," she said softly, "because that's what brought us here. Faith in each other, in new beginnings, in growing things we couldn't see yet." Gabriel's eyes filled with emotion. "It's perfect," he whispered. Clara looked up from her flower crown, her perceptive gaze moving between her mother and Gabriel. "Is it time?" she asked. Isabella nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, it's time." The triplets abandoned their crafts and came to join them on the bench, arranging themselves so that all 6 of them were connected. Sophia leaning against Gabriel's knee, Luna tucked under Isabella's arm, Clara standing behind them with a hand on each adult's shoulder. "Who wants to start?" Gabriel asked, his voice gentle. "Me," Sophia volunteered, always the first to jump in. "I'm grateful for our greenhouse, and for the children who came to learn today, and for the baby sister who's coming soon." Luna went next, her voice no longer a whisper but still soft and thoughtful. "I'm grateful for our family, and that we don't have scary dreams anymore, and that Mama laughs all the time now. I'm grateful that we're all together," Clara said simply, "and that no one is leaving." Gabriel squeezed Isabella's hand, his turn next. "I'm grateful for second chances," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For the courage to start again, for sunflowers that always find the light." Isabella looked around at the faces of her family, the daughters who had survived abandonment and emotional neglect to become joyful, whole children, the man who had taught them all how to grow toward light rather than retreat into shadow, even her father, visible through the greenhouse glass, kneeling to help a small boy with his art project, finding his own redemption. "I'm grateful for answered prayers," she said, her voice steady despite the fullness of her heart, "even the ones I didn't know how to ask for." As they bowed their heads together, Gabriel's gentle prayer washing over them like summer rain, Isabella felt the baby move within her, faith, already part of their circle, already loved beyond measure. In the greenhouse where healing had begun a year ago, surrounded by growing things that had once been just seeds and possibility, the Monroe Carter family completed their circle of gratitude, and Isabella, who had once been as cold and brittle as ice, felt herself bloom once more in the warmth of their shared love. Not a CEO, not an heiress, not defined by loss or achievement, but simply a woman who had found her way home, in the garden where it all began. Their prayer was complete.